Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Annie and Kate. Hello, Annie.
Morning, how are you?
Nice to see you. And lovely to have our guest, Linda McIver, here with us. Hi, Linda.
Hi, Kate. I'm very excited to be here.
Now, Linda is Dr. Linda McIver pioneered authentic data science and computational science education with real impact for secondary students and founded the Australian Data Science Education Institute in 2018. She's the author of Raising Heretics, which I've actually been reading a bit of, which is quite interesting, and is a regular keynote speaker and has been on ABC's The Program That Shall Not Be Named. And she's a passionate educator, researcher, and advocate for STEM. So welcome. Nice to have you. And I'm going to start off by letting you know what I'm drinking, because I have found this to be a delightful drop. This is a Howard Park Cab Sav. Delicious.
Oh, yum. That sounds awesome. I have an aviation. You can't even see it because of the background.
Aviation gin.
Excellent.
Oh, it's an aviation cocktail.
It's a cocktail. Well, it is still 8:35 in the morning here in the UK, so I've just got a nice cold glass of water.
And I take it you've already been out for a walk with the dog.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful day here, so if I don't get out to it right at the early part, then it gets too hot and I'm just one big walking hot flash. So that's no one needs to see that.
All right, so we're going to kick off with one of our regular questions. Do you want to do a first one, Annie?
Yeah, I mean, so Linda, it's great to finally meet you. We've been, I think, Twitter buddies for a few years now.
We have.
It's lovely to meet you pseudo in person or virtually. My question for you is, if you could go back to your younger self, could be any point in your life, and give your younger self some words of advice, what would those words of advice be?
I love this question, and I've been, brushing up on your podcast and watching this question come by, and I was like, oh, I hope they ask me this one, because I thought about all the standard things and the regular advice, and I thought the thing that really that would have changed my life to know earlier is that you don't have to let other people set the terms. So when someone says to you, you either do this or you do that, you can actually do something else entirely. I was a very obedient child, and I grew up in a quite emotionally abusive household. So, I did what I was told, because otherwise the consequences were very unpleasant. And it took me a long time to realize that when someone says, things like, if you love me, you would do this, that actually you can love someone and not do that, like to actually not let other people set the terms and to set your own terms, I think is a revelation, or it was to me.
That's a really good insight.
Yeah, it's hugely important insight. And was there a moment when that kind of really kind of tipped in for you, or was it just sort of looking back, it's become obvious?
I don't think there was a key moment, but there were sort of lots of times where I realized afterwards. It took me a while to get to the point where I can at least sometimes realize beforehand. People are very easily manipulated. We all are, even if we think we're not. And we, the advertising and all that kind of stuff sends us in all kinds of directions, and Facebook and things like that. But it's very, very easy to kind of go with someone else's rules and someone else's terms, and kind of just do what you're expected to do or what you're told you have to do. It's much harder to go, maybe there's a third way, maybe I could do something different. And I guess starting ADSI in 2018 was the point where I went, yeah, this is where I really break free of what everyone else is telling me to do, and this is where I go, you know what, there's a better way and I can make it happen. A lot of people told me that I couldn't do it, that I couldn't start a charity and make change, and that I really needed to do it from within some bigger organization. But there comes a point where you've been squashed down enough in bigger organizations and told you can't do things and not listened to, where you go, I'm going to do it.
I find it fascinating that there are folks out there that tell other people who are trying to do something useful, interesting, and important, and tell them don't do it, it's too hard. It's sort of, I don't understand where that kind of sort of thinking or impetus comes from as a human. Why would you tell someone don't do something unless it's like quite obviously you're going to die or it's going to hurt people? Well, yeah. But otherwise it's like, give it a go. What's the worst that could happen?
I think to some extent it's that rule following again. It's like, that's not the way we do things, you know, that's not the way things happen, that's not my understanding of the way the world works, so it's not going to work. And you have to be able to break free of that and go, well, let's try it, see what happens.
I think, you know, you're rebelling against that whole thing that we were brought up to be nice girls, and
yes,
you know, all girls would basically train to play nicely with others, and you know, you finally broke free from that by the sounds of it.
Well, you do get told you're supposed to fit in. I guess I was lucky in that I never really had much chance of fitting in because I was 6'1", and a girl who's 6'1" in a girls' school is just not gonna fit in from the start. And I was, you know, I was odd and didn't wear the same clothes because I couldn't get them even if I wanted to. They just didn't fit me. And I was interested in computers, and you know, again, that was something we were told you weren't supposed to do, and I didn't have much chance of fitting in, so I guess that helped me be a rebel. Took me a while though.
That whole clothing thing resonates for me because my shoulders are really broad and I put things on a
yeah, you can't move. You're like, hey, I don't think this is gonna work.
Yeah. I've been wearing men's clothing for years as a result of that.
Yeah, I totally get that.
So I want to ask you my favorite question, which is about self-care. Do you practice it? And if you do, what do you do?
I don't practice it enough. And for me, it's much harder in the pandemic because my self-care is spending time with my people. And I don't just mean my family, who I can obviously easily spend time with, perhaps a little too much at the moment. I think they're a bit sick of me, especially with the book going on. It's like, can you stop talking about your book, please? Can you stop talking about your work? Do you have anything other than your work? But yeah, spending time with my loved ones is my optimal form of self-care. And I've actually, we have a 2 p.m. catch up every weekday when we can, which we started, early last year, I think, with a group we call ourselves the Unbossables. And that's been, you know, just a video catch up that we come to if we can. And there's started with 2 of us. It was Michelle Playfair and I, and then we added Gretchen Scott, and it just sort of grew. There's about 6 or 7 semi-regulars now, and it's a lifesaver. It's an absolute lifesaver. But reaching out to people, connecting with people, that's my self-care. That's what gives me life.
It's really interesting because I have a team of introverts who will be really happy if we never make them go outside of their houses ever again.
Yeah,
and it's really interesting because I'm talking to people who are just going, oh my God, that's my idea of hell on earth.
Yeah. I have a bestie. We call ourselves twins, and the only significant difference between us is that she's an introvert and I'm an extrovert, which we found fascinating when we first connected because we felt like that defined us so much, you know, but we're so alike in almost every possible way. And she's quite happy with the whole working from home thing, whereas it's killing me slowly.
It's interesting, is it? Because I've just saw your recent post on your blog around guilt, and how, I mean, obviously for you folks over in Oz, there's quite a lot of people in lockdowns right now. As you both know,
Canberra gone in now.
Yeah, I heard that this morning. You know, I'm over here in the UK, so I've got guilt because I'm not in Australia with my dog and doing all of that. But at the same time, I would be even more guilty if I wasn't here because my dad passed away and I needed to be here for that and say goodbye and help my mum and all of these other things. It's sort of like, it's so hard sometimes to not, it's just really hard sometimes for it all to not kind of just crush you. And Yeah. So what advice do you have for folks out there, Linda, on
Oh.
how to navigate this?
Asking me for advice on managing guilt is like asking an alcoholic how to stop drinking. I suck at it. I've often said I have an overactive guilt gland. It's something that's built into my family, I think. I mean, I feel guilty. Here I am locked down with my family, and I feel guilty for not spending more time with my kids. Like, it's partly because we're all so sick of each other that we're kind of retreating to our private corners a lot of the time. I think it's you have to practice radical self-kindness, and it's really, really hard. And if you're a perfectionist like I am, you wind up then feeling guilty for not being kinder to yourself, and you can wind up in this terrible spiral of just guilt for feeling guilty for not doing the thing.
I was brought
that's
up
what I rely on my people for.
Expert at guilt.
I have this thing called the frying pan of enlightenment, which is, when someone kind of gives you a metaphorical whack around the head, stop it, you're being stupid. I need my friends to do that, because I'm terrible at doing it myself.
That's interesting. So talk to us about the book, Raising Heretics.
I just want to mention one thing in the book. You say you want to show how data science education is key to nurturing a rationally skeptical, creative, ethical, problem-solving population who can save the world. That sounds excellent. So I would really like to hear more about that.
So this is something I discovered while I was teaching. I kind of finally figured out, for me at the start, my background is computer science education. That was what my PhD was in, and that was what I was passionate about. And the whole goal when I was teaching was to get more kids engaged with programming. And initially, the school I was teaching at was doing that in a core year 10 subject. So everyone had to do it, and they were doing it with toys. They were, it was playing with robots and getting them to push each other out of circles and follow lines. And it was drawing pretty pictures in Scratch-based interfaces. And it was, pointless faffing about as far as the kids were concerned. And that it was a science school. So you would think these were kind of, it was preaching to the choir. You'd think they'd be already engaged in tech, but they hated it. They constantly come to me and go, "Why are you making me do this? I hate it." And I couldn't tell them that I hated it too at the time, but I did. Like it was completely pointless. At the same time, in the year 11 course that I had control over, we were doing real projects. So the capstone project in that subject, we'd go and work with scientists and try to solve their computational and data needs. And the kids would keep working on that after the subject was finished. They'd be working on it the next year. Some of them were working on it after they left school, because it had purpose. They could see the point. And I had year 11 students doing cancer research, so it was pretty exciting. But when I finally managed to make the shift in the year 10 subject, I persuaded the teacher in charge to let me run a small data science unit. And it wasn't a real project then, as in the kids didn't have a chance to make impact, but it was working with real data. So we worked with the election data set. So we downloaded every vote for the Senate in the federal election for Victoria. So it was over 3 million lines of a spreadsheet file, but you couldn't open it in a spreadsheet, it was too big. So they had to code. They were learning the same coding skills they'd been learning before, but now they were learning them in the context of a real data set. And we learned how to figure out what questions a data set could answer, how to make it answer them, and then how to visualize them. And the visualizations we did were by hand. Most of the time they were drawing stuff or putting things together in paint programs rather than with code, because it was much easier to make them more interesting that way. And they loved it. And they were super engaged, and they were telling me suddenly how useful it was. And they weren't coming and saying, "Why are you making me do this?" They were coming and saying, "Oh my God, this is so useful. Like, I'm using it in my science project, and I'm using it here, and I used it in the maths exam the other day." And suddenly they could see the point. And they were even coming to me going, "Oh, there was this graph, on the news the other night, and it was terrible because there was no zero on the scale, and it was so misleading." And they were, outraged. And that was bliss. That was great. And I did that a couple more times.
You are making impact when they're annoyed at the graphs on the news.
Right.
Love it.
Yes. So it was working. I'd figured it out. I was like, this is how you engage kids with STEM, which is why I quit. Because I wanted all kids to have that opportunity. But then as I started to grow my organization, the Australian Data Science Education Institute, I figured out that actually getting them involved with code was a bonus. It was a side effect. The key thing was that when they were working with real data sets, they were messy, they were complicated, and they had meaning. And so instead of using, when they did graphing in maths, it was a perfect data set that would always make exactly the right curve, and there were no errors and no complications and no outliers. And the most they learned about graphing was really never use pie charts, and for linear data, for continuous data you use a line graph, and for discrete data you use a bar chart, and that was basically it. Whereas suddenly they were working with real data and figuring out how to get a message across with it. And it was teaching kids that data was complicated and data was messy, and they had to ask difficult questions about it, because that election data set, you tell them the rules of Senate voting and they'd be like, oh, great. So if there's a 1, in the top line, then there won't be a 1 anywhere else. You're like, I would like that to be true, but people don't follow the rules all the time. So the data was, ugly and messy, and it didn't make sense. And that taught them some of the critical thinking. And then I started to shift into projects where kids were collecting their own data on problems that they cared about. So they collect the data, they figure out a problem they care about, they collect the data, they analyze it, they communicate that, and then they try to fix it. And this is the key part. Then they evaluate how well their solution worked. So they check to see if it actually worked and how well it worked and what went wrong and how they could improve it and all that kind of stuff. We don't do that nearly enough. We don't do it in business. We don't do it in education. We don't do it in government, for sure. I used to go into teacher PDs and go, how many of you have had your school implement the latest, greatest Kool-Aid, and then the next year that bit of Kool-Aid has disappeared and you're on to the next thing, and they never actually evaluate it to see if it worked? Every hand goes up. So that's the key part, really, is getting them to evaluate their solutions and think about the ways in which they're wrong. Hello,
that's so
bye.
important. Hi, Maxie.
Hi, Maxie.
That point's really important, and for many, many things. And even with startups and founders, I see them making this mistake every single time, which is your sort of confirmation bias, where they love their idea so much that they want it to work, that they're only looking for the data that points to the positive outcome that they're hoping for, and that they're not really critical at actually, did it really work? And frankly, some founders don't even measure it at all. So the fascination with just, I love my idea that much, this is my baby, and it's going to be perfect. It's sort of, I think if you walk into any problem with the open-mindedness of, I don't know whether this is going to work, and I really want to make sure that I can prove it one way or the other, you're going to be way more successful in whatever that is, whether it's education, government, building a startup. Having that open mind is so important, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And as soon as you get into real problems, there is no single right answer. And chances are it's not even a binary, did it work or not? It's how well did it work? Who did it work for? Who did it not work for? Who's actually disadvantaged by the solution that's trying to make things better for everybody? Because there's going to be somebody, and so it's this idea that your solution is not going to be perfect. It cannot be perfect, which then means the evaluation process is not, oh my God, I might have failed. It's, let's see, where the good bits are, where the bad bits are, how can we improve this? And that's a standard part of every project, rather than, did you get it right or wrong? Is the textbook answer there? Tick, move on.
I want to know how we can get all of school thinking like this, because, I can remember I was about 21 and I went down to Melbourne on a visit, and I was helping some nuns move some stuff, and long story, and I got to use Pythagoras' theorem to work out if something could fit through a doorway, and I was so excited because it was the first time maths had actually been useful in my entire life, and that is the last time it was actually useful in my life too.
Yep. Yeah, it's tragic, really. I mean, my oldest, when she was in year 10, was coming home going, when am I ever, I'm doing calculus, when am I ever going to need this stuff? And so my husband, who's an electrical engineer, sat down and taught her third year power electronics, just the overview, just in half an hour. I was like, well, this is how I use it in my work. She was like, oh, this is so cool. Why don't they tell us this? Like, you divorce it from context and you're just teaching it in order to get a mark, and the kids only do it in order to get a mark. We get frustrated when they're like, is this on the exam? Like, you shouldn't care about that, but we tell them by word and deed that it's the only thing that matters. And in fact, once you get out in the world, it's the only thing that doesn't matter.
When they get to uni and do engineering, it's all about the exam and all about the mark. That's all they care about.
I'm well aware. Yeah,
so
it is.
For you, Linda, when you first started out, you're sort of figuring out what you wanted to study. What was it about computer science that sort of triggered you or really attracted you?
Oh man, it was an accident. So I went to uni to do a biology degree. I was interested in genetics, and to do genetics you had to do maths, biology and chemistry in first year, and that left me one slot. And my cousin Chris gave me his Commodore 64 when I was, I don't know, 10 or something, and I'd plug it into the massive old TV standing in the corner, and it had a tape drive, and it was clunky, but I learned a bit of basic, and I learned that before I learned the message that I wasn't supposed to be interested. And it was fun and I enjoyed it. And when I needed a fill-in subject, I thought, well, I looked down the list. I thought, well, computer science could be fun. And so I picked computer science as my fourth subject in first year. By third year, it was the only thing I was studying, and I'm still not entirely sure how that happened. I loved genetics, but the third year genetics at that time was going to be plant genetics, and I was interested in bacterial and human genetics. I don't want to do plant genetics for third year. I don't want to major in that. So I did a double major in computer science.
Well, that's showing them.
Yeah. It was like, I wasn't that interested in second year either, so still not quite sure how I wound up in third year. It was more or less I tripped and fell into it, I think.
But how did you come to be teaching?
I was an academic. So I went on to do a PhD, which I had said I would never do. I was a big one for doing things I was never going to do. I was never going to do honours. I was never going to do a PhD. My PhD supervisor, Damien Conway, still mocks me for that. But I went on to do a PhD because he offered me a project that was interesting, which was designing a programming language for teaching. And so I played with that for a while and got my PhD. And then I really wanted to teach, but at the time, all I knew was university teaching. So I went on and became a lecturer. When my second baby was due, they had a round of redundancies. And I wasn't really thinking about taking it, but I looked at what I would get if I did. And I knew I wasn't passionate enough about research to really make a go of it. You have to be really driven to carve out the time for research. Teaching, if you let it, can take up all of your time. And I did. And that sort of told me that I really wanted to teach and not research. Yeah. So I did take a package and I took a few years off and I did all kinds of things. I was a project officer for the Breastfeeding Association, and I did freelance writing. I did a bit of pro bono work, communications work for Oxfam. And then someone I used to work with called me up and said, hey, we're doing this thing from Monash. We're doing this thing you might be interested in. And I said, well, I'm not coming back, right? And he said, just listen. And he told me about this school that was starting up that was a science school, and they were designing a new computer science curriculum. And I thought, oh, that actually sounds cool. So I started working for him the next day, just sort of on the side, and I just got drawn further and further into the school because working with those kids was amazing. That was it was incredible. The kids were so interesting and so engaged, not in the year 10 subject. But I started the next year teaching the year 11 subject, and my co-teacher Victor and I got to design that from scratch. And so we basically designed it to be all of the things we found interesting about computer science.
That's such a luxury.
oh, it was incredible. It was such freedom. And despite getting frustrated with the year 10 subject, I stayed because I really wanted to keep doing that subject, because I loved that subject and the kids loved that subject and we had the best time.
But I'm really curious about how you ended up starting your own business. You know, that seems to be a really interesting thing to me.
I think the main reason is, as I said, I'd figured out how to do this right. And I wanted all kids to access it. But I also realized that I wasn't going to be able to do it while I was teaching. I didn't have the support in the school for spreading the word. In fact, they were going to hire a new head of school in over the top of me. And I was probably not going to be able to teach what I wanted to teach anymore. So I was thinking about it, and I thought the other thing about what I was doing was that most teachers couldn't do it, not because they didn't have the ability, but because they didn't have the time. So the only reason I was able to do these complicated data science projects was that I was half-time. So I had the time to go find the data sets and make sense of them and build projects around them. And I used my own time to do that. And I was approached by someone who said to me, who was offering me a job at the time, and she said, so let me get this straight. You're paid half-time, but you basically work full-time so you can do a better job. And I sort of sat back in my chair and I thought, when you put it that way, it sounds kind of dumb. But that's what I was doing. And I was doing that because I wanted to do something real. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if there was someone out there who could support teachers to do this stuff, so they didn't have to invest hours of their own time to make it happen. And so I looked around, I thought, I'm going to find who's doing this and I'm going to join them. Must be crickets. There didn't seem to be anybody doing it. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to start my own organization. I do like being my own boss. There's a reason that catch up of ours at 2 p.m. is called the Unbossables, because I am not very good at doing what I'm told.
And did you enjoy, what was the process, or how was it setting up the company? Was it what you expected?
Oh boy. It was really hard. The paperwork alone was insane. And of course, it's a startup, right? So as the founder of a startup, I had to do everything. And oh gosh, bits of that I hated, like the setting up the website and the accounting and the forms. But at the same time, I knew that everything I was doing was going towards something that I was really passionate about. Everything I was doing counted towards something I really cared about. And that is so not the case in teaching. There is so much garbage, red tape, so many pointless meetings, so much time spent doing things that don't benefit the school and don't benefit the kids, that are really soul destroying. And every new government seems to pile on new levels of admin and ugliness onto teachers without taking any of the rest of it away. And it was just getting worse and worse. So to be able to spend all of my time on things that I felt mattered was bliss. And I was also really lucky that I started meeting very early. I started meeting people who got behind me and who thought it was a great idea and who were hugely supportive. And without my cheer squad, I wouldn't have ever got anywhere. I think I would have bailed in the first year. But every time it got hard, there was someone there to go, this is amazing, keep going.
So you mentioned your cheer squad. Did you consciously find the cheer squad, or did you just accidentally find them and find them helpful?
A bit of both. Mostly it was accidental. I met someone while I was still teaching, actually, who was really instrumental in getting me going, and her name was Lynn Langett, and she's a tech person from the US, and she has worked a lot in tech education. So she was really excited about what I did. She happened to be in Australia for a conference, which was YOW. She was keynoting YOW, and she came to see my classes and was really enthusiastic. And then she came back. She was back in the December, and she was like, we should catch up. And I actually went to the conference dinner with her because it was the only time we could catch up. And she started introducing me to people. And Dave Thomas of YOW was really enthusiastic about what I was thinking because this was December, so I started to think about what I was going to do. And he was like, if there's any way I can help, let me know. So as soon as I was up and running, I contacted him, and he was like, well, you should come and do a Yao night, which is basically a speaking tour from Melbourne, Sydney, and Brisbane. And you should speak at Yao Data, which is a big data science conference.
Pretty sure that's how we met. We met at a Yao once years ago.
Quite possibly. We've certainly met at C3DIS as well. So Sam Moskva, who was running C3DIS and research at the time, was also really supportive. And so he had me speak and run workshops and stuff. And all of that, that sort of conference support was how I started meeting people who thought this was just the best idea ever. And they basically became my cheer squad. It's easy for me to be passionate about it. Like I can rave about it all day. So when people hear about it and they're keen, it works really well.
I really do wonder how people will do that now, in this day of virtual conferences, because you miss that kind of corridor conversation that is the kind of thing that often catalyzes those relationships.
Yeah, you really do. And I've sort of, it's an entirely different skill to connect with people in those online conferences. And some conferences do it better than others. They have better sort of chat spaces than others. PyCon last year did a really good job of getting the conversation going.
The problem really that sort of comes in at that point, though, is in order for you to sort of foster those sorts of relationships, you actually do have to be intentional about it. Yeah. And if you don't have that, sort of outlook of, right, I'm going to find people who at this event who I think I'm going to be, sort of have some sort of personal connection with, who might be able to help me. A lot of times, we do find our cheer squads or our tribes or whatever you want to call that by accident. And
in the coffee cart queue or something, and you just start chatting to the person next to you, and that's gone now. So because I've been to some conferences that have had really, really, really bad interfaces where they've got these kind of virtual, just imagine Second Life mashed up with some hideous thing where it's supposed to be sitting around campfires, and it was just the most weird and strange thing. And I was just like, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah, I've been to some of those too, but some of them work really well. And I was lucky, I guess, that I got my network sort of well underway before all this hit. But the other thing is, if you, as Annie says, if you're intentional about it and you drop things into the conversation, every time I love the online events where they're really collaborative rather than just a webinar where you can't contribute. So where there's a really active chat. And Pawsey Supercomputing Centre, I'm very fond of, and I do a lot of work with them. And all of their events are meetings, not webinars, which means there's a real sense of community and a lot of opportunities to connect. So I met the WA chief scientist that way, and I've connected with a bunch of organizations over there that I'm starting to do work with, just because I saw them in the chat and I got involved at all, or I drop what I'm doing in the chat, and anyone who's interested seeks me out. But it's really putting yourself out there, and that's something that was really difficult to learn because we're taught not to. We're taught to make ourselves small, whereas I have to go, hey, I'm doing this thing, and actually it's pretty awesome, and you should get involved. That was hard to learn to do.
And just really interested in digging in on that a bit, because you're right, it is basically against girl programming, how girls have traditionally been programmed. So how did you manage to break out of that?
I wouldn't say it's done. It's definitely still a work in progress. I'm particularly finding I've only just released the book, and I'm having to really work hard to put it out there and go, actually, this is pretty awesome. I got some just breathtaking feedback from Ellen Broad yesterday that made me teary. It was so positive and encouraging. And I'm like, okay, I have to share that. And for me, the trick is I'm sharing the work and I'm spruiking the work. I'm not spruiking myself.
Yeah.
Because if I stood up and said, I am amazing, I would just die, just crumple in a heap. I can't, it just feels so wrong. But I can stand up and go, this work is really important, and you really want to get involved. That I can do because I love the work and I'm passionate about the work. It's like it's like spruiking for your children. Like, you'll do anything for your children that you wouldn't do for yourself, or you do something for your friends that you wouldn't do for yourself. My bestie Robin often says to me, treat yourself the way you tell me to treat myself, which is hard. But yeah, I could do it for the work. I can't do it for me.
I'm really glad Ellen's giving some good feedback. We need to get Ellen Broad on the show.
You absolutely should.
Good idea.
She'd be amazing.
She's amazing. It's really interesting. You seem to have built up an interesting network of women to support you. Was that intentional or was that accidental?
Oh man, if I'd had the choice, I would not have. Because I went to a girls' school and it was a nightmare, and I thought that groups of women were just to be absolutely avoided. I think half the reason I wound up in computer science was because it was a group of men and I felt a lot safer there, which is, ironic in so many ways. But I had a miserable time at high school. I felt I was bullied and I felt like I didn't fit in, and it was awful. Whereas I hung out with the guys and I felt like I belonged. So the network of women, it started with the Superstars of STEM program, which I got selected for in 2016, I think, the very first cohort of Superstars of STEM. And I met 28 other women. And when I first got selected for the program, I said to Zoe, my oldest, I said, I'm actually really nervous about this. I'm going to have to hang out in a group of women, and that's terrifying. And she went, that is garbage, Mum. It's not about their gender. It's about who they are. And I went, oh, I've been told. She was right, obviously. And those women are amazing. And it was such a supportive and wonderful network to be a part of. It was by far the best part of the program, was the support and friendship of those women, many of whom I'm still in close contact with now. And that kind of changed my view on hanging out with women. But also, I don't know, I certainly didn't set out to meet more amazing women. I've just been really lucky in who I've connected with and who's become part of my network, I guess.
Yeah, that's lovely.
I was just going to ask Linda, what does the future look like for you? Obviously you've written the book. You want to teach kids the fundamentals of data science so that they can actually solve real world problems. Is that the mission now? Is that this is what you want to do for the world, or is there other things you've got on the horizon as well?
For me, the main thing is changing education. So I when I started ADSI, I said very early on, I'm not going to teach kids, much as I miss them. I'm going to teach teachers because it scales better. And ultimately, the real scale would be change the way teachers are taught and change the curriculum. So that's the long-term goal, is fix the whole lot, not just get a few digital technologies teachers doing data science well, but actually change the whole thing. It's why Raising Heretics became more than just a book about teaching kids to code. It became teaching kids critical thinking and communication skills and teaching them to be ethical and all those kinds of things. And so I think this is my life's work, really. There's so many other things that need fixing, but this is something that I really understand, and I can see a path to fixing this properly. So I'm trying not to let myself get distracted by all of the other things I want to fix, and just focus on just sorting this one. Sometimes I joke and I'm like, I'm going to change the education system. Give me a couple of weeks, then I can move on. But my goal is to put my organization out of business, right? Because it's the way teachers are taught to teach. It's the way the curriculum is written. It's the way schools work. But I don't think my job is in any immediate danger.
Well, that is an excellent spot for us to finish on. And thanks so much for joining us tonight, Linda. I really appreciate it. Lovely to see you again, Annie. And folks, please stay safe and well, and leave us a nice review.